Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. She tried to stun a royal guard. It went horribly wrong. Catherine Kate Sinclair had never been told no in her life. At 38, she was the right hand of one of the most powerful CEOs in New York, a position she had fought tooth and nail to secure. With her sharp designer suit, sleek blonde hair, and a presence that commanded attention, she had built an entire career on the foundation of control. People listened when she spoke. They stepped aside when she walked past. They followed orders without question. Her trip to London was supposed to be business as usual, an important meeting, a luxury hotel suite, and a bit of sightseeing squeezed in between power lunches. But as she strode through the crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace, Kate felt an unfamiliar irritation creeping in. The tourists moved too slowly, stopping to snap photos and gawk at the towering gates. A family with a stroller blocked her path, forcing her to maneuver around them with an exasperated sigh. She barely avoided swinging her expensive leather briefcase into the child's head. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, brushing off her suit as if the very air had somehow inconvenienced her. "Don't these people have jobs?" Kate checked her diamond-encrusted Rolex, a gift from her boss that she made sure everyone noticed. She was on a tight schedule, and the idea of being held up by a crowd of ordinary people infuriated her. She had things to do, important things. But as she moved through the courtyard, something else caught her attention. A royal guard, standing at attention in his striking red uniform and tall black bearskin hat, stood motionless near the gates. The very sight of him, so rigid, so indifferent, sparked something in her. Everyone around him showed a quiet respect, but to Kate, it was baffling. Why were people so fascinated by a man who was nothing more than a ceremonial figure? She tilted her head, a slow smirk curling at the edge of her lips. There was something infuriating about how he didn't even acknowledge her presence. "Let's see how long that lasts," she murmured under her breath. Adjusting her blazer with precise movements, Kate took a confident step forward. The morning sun cast her shadow across the courtyard stones, her heels clicking against the pavement like the countdown to a storm. If there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was being ignored. And this man, this guard, was about to learn exactly who she was. Kate Sinclair wasn't used to being ignored. It wasn't just annoying, it was unacceptable. And yet, as she stood a few feet from the royal guard, waiting for even the slightest reaction, she got nothing. His posture was perfect, his gaze locked straight ahead, as if she didn't even exist. Her smirk faltered. She took another step closer, her designer heels clicking against the stone, each one deliberate. Still, the guard didn't move. Didn't blink. It was like he was carved from stone. Kate folded her arms, tilting her head as she studied him. "I saw that," she announced, her voice sharp and confident. "Don't pretend you weren't looking." A few tourists nearby turned their heads at the accusation, their conversations pausing. The guard, however, remained motionless. Kate's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to resistance, and she certainly wasn't used to being treated like she was invisible. Every day, executives, board members, and high-profile clients bent over backward to stay on her good side. And yet, this man in his ridiculous hat was standing here, ignoring her? She stepped into his line of sight, her presence impossible to ignore now. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I'm speaking to you." Silence. The muscles in her jaw tightened. A flicker of frustration sparked in her chest, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she let out a soft, condescending laugh. "This is exactly the kind of unprofessional behavior I've come to expect from ceremonial staff," she muttered, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. More eyes turned toward her now. An older couple whispered to each other, their expressions uneasy. A few parents guided their children away, sensing that something was brewing. But Kate was too focused to care. She took another step, her expensive perfume thick in the morning air. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she asked, her voice dipping into something dangerously close to a threat. "I'm the executive assistant to William Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Global. One word from me, and your superiors will be answering to people who actually matter." Still, nothing. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her briefcase. This wasn't just defiance. It was a challenge. A challenge to the very authority she had spent her entire career wielding over people. And Kate Sinclair didn't lose. Not to anyone. And certainly not to a man who refused to even look at her. Kate Sinclair's patience was razor thin. This wasn't just frustrating anymore, it was humiliating. The Royal Guard still hadn't acknowledged her. Not a glance, not a twitch, not even the slightest indication that he was aware of her presence. It was infuriating. She could feel the weight of the tourists' stares, their hushed whispers carrying through the courtyard. Some were intrigued, others uncomfortable. But Kate didn't care. She had come too far to be ignored now. Her fingers drummed against the side of her briefcase as she let out a slow, controlled breath. Fine. If authority didn't work, maybe intimidation would. "You think that silly uniform makes you untouchable?" she scoffed, stepping even closer, practically invading his space. "Let me tell you something about power. Real power isn't about standing still and looking important. It's about making things happen." Nothing. Kate's nails dug into her palm. The silence was deafening. She straightened her shoulders, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I've had people fired for less than this," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. "Just last week, I had a senior VP removed from the board because he didn't stand when I entered the conference room." Still, the guard didn't flinch. Kate's pulse quickened. She had won battles with CEOs and crushed the careers of men twice his rank with just a few well-placed phone calls. Yet here she was, standing in front of a glorified statue, and for the first time in years, she felt powerless. Her grip on her briefcase tightened. "Enough of this," she snapped, reaching inside. Her fingers brushed against cool leather, the small case that held the one thing that would demand his attention. A stun gun. It was sleek, discreet, and powerful, a gift from her boss, meant for protection in dangerous situations. But this wasn't about safety. This was about proving a point. Kate glanced around. The crowd had grown. People were watching, waiting. Good. Let them see. Let them understand that no one ignored Catherine Sinclair and got away with it. She exhaled slowly, her thumb resting on the activation switch. If words wouldn't make him acknowledge her, then 1,000 volts of electricity would. Kate Sinclair had made up her mind. If words wouldn't break his composure, then action would. Her fingers wrapped around the stun gun's grip, her thumb hovering over the activation switch. It was a small, sleek device, but powerful enough to drop a grown man in seconds. She had no doubt that the royal guard would crumble just like everyone else who had dared to challenge her authority. The energy in the courtyard shifted. The murmuring crowd had grown silent, their uneasy gazes locked on her. Some instinctively stepped back, sensing the moment was about to tip into something dangerous. A veteran in his mid-60s, standing nearby with his wife, narrowed his eyes, recognizing the look in Kate's face, entitlement on the edge of recklessness. But Kate didn't care. With a flick of her wrist, she brought the stun gun forward and pressed it against the guard's side. A sharp, crackling arc of electricity jumped between the metal contacts, delivering thousands of volts through the thick fabric of his uniform. For the first time, there was movement. The guard's jaw clenched, his muscles tensed from the sudden jolt of pain. A normal man would have collapsed. A lesser man would have screamed. But this was no ordinary man. He had trained for real combat, survived war zones far worse than a marble courtyard in London. He had faced enemy fire, endured brutal conditions, and had the discipline of a soldier who had seen the worst of humanity, and walked away standing. Kate's smug grin faltered. The guard's body remained upright, his posture unbroken despite the electric shock surging through him. And then, with the speed she never saw coming, his white-gloved hand shot out, locking around her wrist in an iron grip. The stun gun clattered to the ground. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she tried to yank her arm free, but his hold was unshakable, firm, yet precise, applying just enough pressure to immobilize her without causing harm. The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs. The veteran watching nearby took a step forward, his wife clutching his arm. Palace security had already begun moving toward the scene, their eyes locked onto the escalating confrontation. Kate's heart pounded in her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. And that terrified her. Kate Sinclair's world shattered in an instant. Her breath hitched as she struggled against the iron grip around her wrist. The royal guard, unmoved by the electric shock she had delivered, stood like an unbreakable wall, his posture as rigid and disciplined as before. But now, there was something else, a shift in the air, a quiet yet unmistakable show of power. Kate yanked at her arm, but it was useless. His grip wasn't violent, but it was absolute. There was no room for negotiation, no space for her usual tactics. For the first time in her life, she had encountered someone who wouldn't bend, wouldn't yield, someone whose strength wasn't dictated by wealth or influence, but by discipline, by training, by a level of control she could never hope to understand. You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed, her voice cracking with desperation. The guard remained silent. Palace security had closed in, their faces unreadable but their intent clear. Behind them, 2 Metropolitan Police officers rushed forward, hands on their belts, ready to intervene. The murmuring crowd had become a full-blown spectacle now, tourists holding up phones, whispering in disbelief. A voice cut through the noise, calm yet commanding. "You just assaulted a member of the King's Guard," the veteran stated, stepping closer. His years of service were evident in the steel of his tone. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Kate's eyes darted around, her carefully built world closing in on her. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to be afraid of her, not the other way around. "I was defending myself," she snapped, her voice higher now, more frantic. "He was harassing me. You all saw it." The security officer nearest to her barely raised an eyebrow. "The CCTV saw it too," he said evenly. "Every second of it." Kate's mouth opened, but no words came out. One of the police officers pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the metallic glint catching the morning sun. "Catherine Sinclair, you're under arrest for assaulting an active duty serviceman," he announced. "You have the right to remain silent." "No. This is a mistake," she shrieked, trying to pull away. But the guard finally released her wrist, letting the officers take over. She stumbled as the cold steel cuffs snapped around her wrists. The Royal Guard, his uniform still perfect despite the attack, stepped back into position, his gaze fixed forward as if nothing had happened. Unshaken. Unmoved. Untouchable. And Kate? She had finally learned what real power looked like. And it wasn't hers. What do you think? Was this a case of entitlement finally meeting its match? Or do you think Kate truly believed she was in the right? Have you ever witnessed a moment where power and arrogance clashed with discipline and duty? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you respect the unwavering discipline of the Royal Guards? Have you ever encountered someone who thought they were untouchable, only to watch them face real consequences? Let's hear your take. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that prove true strength isn't about status, it's about character.